went to my friend's house. Then she decided she wanted to go to church that night. I told her yes, I would go. We went on to church and came back. A car run up the side of us. 6 young men jumped out with a gun and said that you the one that cut a white boy and clocked him. The police got us out looking for you. You get in the car and we'll take you uptown to the police station. And they got me in the car and carried me straight to the woods. But before they got where they was going, they blindfolded me. After they messed over and did what they gonna do, they said, we gonna take you back. We gonna put you out. But if you tell it, we gonna kill you. So first person I met was my daddy. And he said, what in the world you been? And I said, some white boy took me out and messed with me. Then the next person I met was Mr. Lewis, was the high sheriff. And he asked me, he said, well, Recy, what in the world happened to you tonight? And I told him. So Mr. Lewis said, let's us go back to this store. And said, when we get to this store, I'm going to go and see if I can find them.
If the same situation had occurred to a white woman, the outcome would have been much different. Recy had to fight for justice due to our country's racist past.
In the early 1800s, slave labor was still a driving force in the American economy. Large plantation owners in the South grew tobacco, cotton, and other labor-intensive crops which they used slaves for.
The slave labor force created a social class system in which white male landowners were at the top and black women were at the bottom. This system continued through the beginning of the 20th century, even after the Civil War.
The Civil War occurred from 1861 to 1865 and was a war between the Confederate States of the South and the Union States of the North. The fight was largely due to the disparities over slavery. The North had an industrialized economy in which slaves were not needed, while the South relied heavily on slaves due to their plantation-based economy.
The Civil War ended with the abolishment of slavery from the 13th Amendment. Furthermore, the passing of the 14th and 15th Amendments granted citizenship and voting rights regardless of color or race.
Although the passing of these laws allowed the South to rejoin the Union, they were not followed. Instead, the South established their own laws called the Black Codes, which limited freedmen's access to job opportunities and forced them to work in specific unions that were nearly as corrupt as slavery while still being legal.
At the start of the 1880s, Jim Crow laws, which were previously enforced in the South, made a drastic prevalence in Southern society. These laws segregated everyday items like bathrooms, water fountains, train cars, buses, and much more that we experience in our everyday lives.
All these factors led to groups like the Ku Klux Klan. The KKK was a white supremacist group that performed lynchings, assaults, and vandalism against African Americans. The KKK gained traction once again in the early 20th century, influencing much of Southern communities to violently discriminate against African Americans. Meanwhile, at the same time as the black suffrage movement occurred, women were fighting for their rights as well.
On July 19th and 20th, in 1848, influential women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the Grimke sisters held a convention to inspire others towards women's rights. Many of these women were also a part of the Black abolitionist movement, but their ideas were not respected by the men. This brought out frustration and inspired a change. The convention held was called the Seneca Falls Convention to discuss the social, civil, and religious rights of women.
This convention, along with the women's suffrage movement, led to the passing of the 19th Amendment in 1920, which granted women the right to vote.
Although by the 1940s laws were in place to protect the rights of African Americans and women, Southern whites continued to harass these marginalized members of society due to their deep-rooted beliefs in white supremacy.
This impacted Recy Taylor as an African American woman because she was targeted due to her vulnerability.
In the days after the incident, Recy stayed with her dad, but as soon as she returned home, her house was firebombed.
Fire was set to her porch, however, her whole family was able to escape safely.
Her family was sent multiple threats, to where the father would stay up all night sitting on the porch with a shotgun in hand.
The 6 men who raped Recy offered $600 to her husband in order to keep her quiet.
Her husband, Willie Taylor, considered it, but he knew his wife would never forgive him.
The torture had to stop. Someone called the NAACP and Rosa Parks was sent over to help.
Parks was well known for her activism and causing commotion even before the Montgomery bus boycott. So just 15 minutes after she arrives, the sheriff, Louis Corbett, busts down her father's cabin door and yells, "Get out of here, all the way out of town."
She leaves and 2 weeks later comes back. Again, the sheriff busts into the house and grabs Park, drags her outside, and makes her fall to her knees. "If I see you taking one more step into these town lines, I'll send you to jail and keep you there."
However, Taylor and Parks were not discouraged, resulting in Taylor taking her case to court. Recy Taylor had an unusual experience in court. She was isolated from her rapist and the rest of the court. Recy was only heard in a small room in the back of the courthouse.
Although the judge had 2 confessions and significant evidence convicting the 6 men, there was no prosecution.
The men used false claims that Recy wanted it and loved it as their defense.
The media began to react to her case and petitioned for a fair prosecution.
One petition for Recy receiving equal justice under the law filled 4 pages of signatures and was sent to Governor Chauncey Sparks. The governor worked on an investigation, and a second grand jury was held in 1945, with once again the same results.
More media advocated for Recy's rights, however, such failure caused them to stop reaching out and move on to more prevalent issues.
65 years later, in 2011, Recy Taylor received a formal apology by Alabama state legislature. Recy is part of a longer tradition of black women saying not only do we deserve protection, but we deserve justice.
After Rosa Parks worked in cases of injustice like Recy Taylor's, she became a more well-known activist and essential member of the civil rights movement. Rosa was impacted by the women that she worked with, and it led her to stand up for her own rights, such as not giving up her seat on the bus.
The group Equal Justice Under Law created Recy Taylor's book, which detailed the case against Recy Taylor's assailants. Henrietta Buckmaster's introduction covers the lengthy struggle of women for equality and then states, Taylor represents women who just want to raise their children without fear and love their husbands with assurance and be individuals to which their highest hopes and capacities entitle them. This is what we are fighting for.
Until the age of 97, when Recy Taylor sadly passed, she continued to do interviews and spread her message of the importance of equal justice. Recy's story reached far across the country and was even featured in a speech by Oprah in 2018 at the Golden Globes. Oprah drew parallels between Recy's experience and what is happening in current society. It is important that we understand this tragic situation and the effects of the case on Recy and our country's history in order to prevent history from repeating itself.